and welcome to Depth Insights, where we take a depth psychological look at what's going on in your world today.
I'm your host, Bonnie Bright.
And today we are doing a video interview with Dr. Erel Shalit, who is a Jungian analyst in Israel. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shalit.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm glad to be here. Good morning to you, in fact, while it's evening here where I am. I also want to thank you for inviting me to the show.
Really glad to have you here because we're going to be talking today about your book, The Cycle of Life, Themes and Tales of the Journey. And this book is our featured book for the February online book club on Depth Psychology Alliance. And Depth Psychology Alliance, as most people who are watching this know, is an online community for everyone who's interested in the field of depth and Jungian psychology. And the online book club is a new initiative that we're doing in 2012, and each month the book club is being tended by a different author with a book that they are excited to talk about and to present. And we launched that on January 1st, and it's been going really wonderfully well. And I'm looking ahead now to February when you'll be taking over with your book. And your book, of course, is quite different from the first book that we're doing in January. The book in January is a depth psychology novel. And your book is quite different. And being that you are a Jungian analyst, clearly there's a lot of scholarship there. And I'm familiar with your work. We actually met in person a couple of years ago now, which was really a wonderful opportunity for me. And it's been lovely to stay in touch with you. I know you have a lot going on, but why don't we jump in and talk about the book first, and then we'll get to your travel plans and some of the other things that you have coming up. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the book itself, maybe a little bit about the themes, and also how you came to write this particular book. What was your motivation to write The Cycle of Life?
Well, let me say first that I feel a bit envious of the first author or the January author who presents a novel, because I think that I would have loved to be an author and write novels. Truth is, I did write a novella. My previous book was a novella, a short novella, and I hope sometimes I do get the feedback that my books are not that scholarly, but do have something of a more literary quality as well. So I hope that I achieve this with the Cycle of Life as well. This is a book which has been in the writing for many years, and in that sense, I have progressed with the book, and since it pertains to the cycle of life, I have grown old together with the writing of the book. It was published just a couple of months ago, and so in a way, the book starts at the end. It starts, in fact, with coming to the cover of the book. I don't know if you can see here the cover of the book, which is extremely special and important to me. During the several last months of preparing the book for publication, I went searching for an adequate cover. And as I write in the beginning of the book, I nearly went into despair, having the idea or the image that I would end up with a book without a cover, nothing to present it, without a persona, without a face. I kept trying to find adequate images, pictures, and here I think I have to thank my editor and publisher, Mel Matthews of Fish King Press. He kept guiding me with in a very nice and subtle way, saying that, well, this idea is not really the right thing. And so eventually I did find I recalled having seen paintings of a painter whom I didn't know, and I did find him online. I found his website, and as I entered his website, I found this exquisite and very special painting called Life. Basically, it's burning candles, and it tells the wonderful story of life as well as the tragic side of life because the candles burn out. I, of course, realized what we all know, that only a candle that you don't light will never burn out. And so to live your life fully also means that the candle will eventually burn out. So in a way, I must admit that the last chapter of the book is my favorite one, maybe because I have come, I've come to that part of my own book in a way.
That's really a lovely metaphor. I really like how you are using the imagery of the candle. And I remember being very young as a student in my probably early 20s, and I've always loved candles, but I would buy them and never burn them. Because, when you're a student and you're on a student budget, you don't want to use them up. And so I would have them sitting around, but I would never use them. And I find that I have come to a place in my own life where now I burn them all the time. And, I'm in a very different stage of life, but I think it's exactly what you're alluding to, and that is that we do move through these different stages. And you're absolutely right. If you don't light the fire and the candle never is able to live out its purpose, right? Just like we are. And I really appreciate the artwork that is on the cover of the book. As you mentioned, it's absolutely stunning. And I want to take a moment just to mention here that if you're interested, anyone out there who's listening, who's interested in joining the book club, it's free. It's online. It's done actually very simply in the sense that, Erel, you will be assigning readings each week, and you'll be making commentary, and then you'll be responding a few times a week to questions, comments, whatever people have to say about it. It's all done through writing. And then what we'll see, I think, is that themes will begin to develop, and we'll really start a lovely discussion about the book in the group. And anybody who would like to join that group will need to be a member of Depth Psychology Alliance, which is also free to join. And I think that you will find just a lovely community there with all kinds of information about depth psychology. So the way that you can find out about the book club and join the book club is to go to, I'll give you a URL, www.depthinsights.com, and there will be a link there where you can find the book club. But let's go back to the book for just a minute, Erel. The image that I'm really having as you're talking about the moving through the cycle of life and the stages and the whole idea of the candle and burning the candle down is the seasons and moving through the seasons of life. And of course, we're currently in winter, full in winter, and you'll be presenting this book in February, which is kind of an interesting, it's an interesting time. Maybe you could talk archetypally about maybe not necessarily seasons, but about the journey itself. And of course, your chapters go through the journey and some of the different seasons. But would you like to talk about the process a little bit more, or any one of those particular stages?
I'll be happy to. Daniel Levinson, who was a developmental psychologist, wrote a book, Seasons of a Man's Life. I think he had a follow-up book called Seasons of a Woman's Life, if I recall correctly. So he spoke about seasons, and not necessarily merely the linear development through life. And very few people, I think, remember that Erik Erikson, who is maybe the most prominent psychoanalytic author on the cycle of life, his most pertinent essay was not the stages of a man's life, but ages of a man's life. I think that slight difference between ages and stages is a tremendously important one. And I think it also signifies that even if you look at the cycle of life or the stages of life, um, it's not only linear, it's not only a linear development, but each stage or each age or each season of our lives has an archetypal nucleus. It has its own particular meaning and cluster of issues that it signifies. Even classical Freudian psychoanalysis describes the stages of a child's development, and we are all expected more or less to pass through those stages. And so these stages are universal, archetypal stages. If we fail to go through them, then we may become fixated in one stage and there is problem. So the journey through our life, which is often described also in literature, in mythology, the journey that represents life has an archetypal, universal basis that we are supposed to go through. If we are reluctant to travel on that journey, then that may characterize the neurotic person. Doesn't want to set off, doesn't want to travel, doesn't want to sail his or her ship across the ocean of one's life.
Doesn't want to light the candle, perhaps.
Exactly. And if we refer to lighting the candle, the age or the stage of fire is youth. And youth, much of the essence of youth is transformation, is to create a change, to bridge the age of childhood with adulthood, bringing the individual into his or her own identity, not merely residing, dwelling in the age of early development of childhood, but also reluctant to the grayness, the dullness, the flat, the horizontal life of adulthood. So the adolescent, the young man or woman, the poor or the puella, will often set things on fire, has burning emotions, burning needs, strong yearnings, great ideologies, and can often accomplish or destroy big things.
Yeah, that's very powerful. We know that fire has that capacity to be either creative or destructive. And I suspect that being aware of how this occurs in our own lives can be very helpful when we're young like that. It's really hard to be aware because we don't have enough life experience often to understand what it's all about. And yet that's often when the fire is the strongest in us. And so there's this kind of interesting curve, the way that I see it, how as we get older, the fire may start to wane or maybe just be refined in a different way. It's not the same, texture or feel as it used to be, but only as we start to become aware of ourselves, then, and that fire is refined and changed, we move into a completely different stage of life.
It's really good that you mentioned that, because even if we would characterize or ascribe characteristics to a certain age, child, adolescent, the adult, or the senex, the old person, the fire shouldn't be extinguished the fire should still be burning. When we see an old person without any fire, when we see a young person without fire, it may be horrendous. It may, the sense of depression when there is no fire. But an old person who lives out the less controlled fire of youth, then it's not fully adequate. The old person should retain, should refine his or her fire, but it shouldn't be the fire of youth. The fire should also develop and be adequately used. Fire, you know what happens when fire becomes inappropriate for a person?
Tell me.
The person becomes burned out.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge problem in our culture today. You know, when we start to look particularly at younger generations, I don't mean to point a finger at them because I think there are a lot of very self-aware young people and a huge kind of wave of consciousness that seems to be really coming across our culture in certain ways as well. But we see that a lot with people that don't have the direction for the energy or the fire. They don't have something in which to funnel that or channel it or contain it. And I think that's why depth psychology for me has been so powerful, because it's really a container. Jungian psychology is a way to hold that fire and to begin to observe it and understand it so that it can grow with us and be refined. On that note, Erel, I wonder, you do talk about Jung's stages of life in the book. Do you want to expound a little bit on that for us?
Gladly, yeah. Jung wrote this essay, his essay Stages of Life, in the early 1930s. So in fact, he preceded Erikson with nearly 20 years, I think, on the subject. Jung, in that sense, was perhaps the first psychoanalyst who dealt more firmly with the second half of life. But there is one particular thing, I think, that strikes me in a powerful way with Jung's essay, and that's how much he devotes to the issue of problem. He speaks about problem. Problem becomes central to one's own development. When one's senses, or when one experiences one's life as problem-free, there is not very much of meaningful development. There is no development in depth. I'm not just speaking, of course, here about that natural development that we grow, but it's the development in depth. It's not just living one's life, which is, of course, tremendously important, but it's living the conscious life. And that's what Jung brings forth by putting problem in the center. I mentioned somewhere in the book about that, I refer to Rilke, who writes so pertinently about problem, how he wants his problems. He doesn't want anyone else's problems. He wants his own problems. And I guess that Rilke was not exactly without problems. It's to deal with, struggle with, experience, and go into depth with one's own problems. When we don't do that, either there is no development because we see no problems, there are no struggles, we are not examining anything, we don't reflect. If there is no sense of problem, we often do not need to reflect. We don't engage our psyche in dialogue. And the bad news about it is not only that I myself run the risk of not developing, but I run the risk of causing problems for others, where I don't deal with my own problems. The risk is that others, often one's children, will have to carry that shadow and deal with or carry the consequences of my unrelated to problems. So I think that Jung puts here an emphasis on living the conscious life. Similar to Socrates, who said, the unexamined life is not worth living. To relate to our own life. And that, in a way, pertains to the senex part, the old age part of our lives. And again, here it's archetypal. It's not just developmental. It's archetypal, which means that the old man in oneself, old man or woman in oneself, exists, should be present at all stages of life. It's not something that we should just push away till we come to the very end. They're relating to what we live through, what we experience, the difficulties, the loves and the hatreds, the fate that we carry, the destiny that we choose or manage to define, relating to all that which in fact is creating meaning of one's life. It should be there all through our life, all through our lives. But of course, if a child does not play but sits down and reflects too much about what he or she is doing, that's really to take away the child from one's childhood. The child should play. The child should really be. And even if a child does reflect, and the development of language is part of reflection, the child, of course, should, and not in a too abstract way, relate to his or her own play and deeds.
Yeah, there's really a natural cycle to things, and I relate that to the title of your book, The Cycle of Life. But there's very much a natural balance when you're talking about these archetypes, the child having too much of the senex in them, or I think a lot about the idea of initiation, or actually, which is an archetype in and of itself. But the archetype of initiation, I believe, brings us more into balance. And so if we've been initiated, we're able to kind of manage that, or maybe the natural order of things finds its own balance with all of these archetypes within us. But it's definitely something important to pay attention to. And most people who are parents, it would probably behoove them really to pay attention in their own children to be able to make sure that the kids are getting the balance that they require in life. If they notice them sitting too much and reflecting too much, to really try to spark that creativity and the childlike aspect in order for them to be able to come into themselves.
Yeah. So let me maybe mention or say a word about initiation, since you mentioned that. Initiation and transition are connected. Initiation, and we, in today's world, we have very few, or we have diminished the manifestations of rites of initiation. We don't emphasize that very much. Every stage or every psychological age of through life requires an initiation. We run into crisis if we are reluctant to initiation. So we all are maybe familiar with rites of initiation in youth. And by the way, many initiation rites in youth have to do with fire, how to deal with fire, how to go through fire, how to jump through fire, how to control fire, how to be able to control a bonfire, to be near it, to feel the passions, the stimulation, the interaction, the fire of one's thoughts and creativity, and of course, in relation to others, to young men and women, how to deal with that fire is part of the initiation of youth. If we go to midlife, I think that the essence of midlife initiation is to struggle with, to deal with the issue of death, not only in old age, but in midlife. This is where often, and it doesn't matter so much exactly what we call midlife or when one's individual midlife takes place. It's to be able to gain that change of perspective where one realizes that what one has done so far as one ascends the ladder of one's life and gets to the zenith or to the height of one's capabilities, that at the very height of it, often one needs to start the descent. Jung describes this beautifully. And it means it requires that one searches more profoundly for a sense of meaning in one's life. I would like to read you the extremely brief story that Kafka wrote about this. And with Kafka, he died, I think he must have been around 44 when he died, which is midlife. And he wrote this very brief story, something like in his mid-30s or late 30s. So he was on the one hand a young man, not married, with some relationships with women, some of them quite problematic. On the other hand, he was a very old man, very close to his death. His story goes like this. My grandfather used to say, life is astoundingly short. To me, looking back over it, life seems so foreshortened that I scarcely understand, for instance, how a young man can decide to ride over to the next village without being afraid that, not to mention accidents, even the span of a normal happy life may fall far short of the time needed for such a journey. That's Kafka's story, The Next Village. So from the perspective of the young person, the ride to the next village, the next adventure across the river, who knows what lies await for him or her over there. It's the mission of it's a huge opus. That's the work. But when you've arrived at that next village, and when you recall your travels, it can all be comprised in the mere grain of one's memory. And it seems so short and it all passes so quickly that the perspective becomes entirely different.
That's a very beautiful story and very touching. I hadn't heard that actually, but it does put it in perspective. And in some ways, even that story itself, let alone the journey to the next village, also is an initiation because it gives a change of perspective. Uh, Erel, I really appreciate the time that we've spent together today. I'm so looking forward to the book club in February because I believe that the book club will also serve as a change of perspective for all of us who participate in that. And I can't wait to really dig into the book with you and to get into some of the themes and the questions and comments that I'm sure all of the group will have. Again, I just want to thank you for being here with us. I know that you're going to be in the U.S. For those who might have the opportunity to attend some of your lectures. Do you want to just briefly share where and when you'll be to the extent that you can, and also give us a website where we can track your progress and get updates?
Right. I guess that will soon be updated. Um, very beginning of March, I will be in Denver, speaking about the cycle of life, a lecture and a workshop. And I think it's 9th and 10th of March, I will be in Santa Fe, where I will speak about my thoughts about our postmodern era, which belongs to one of my forthcoming books. And I want to thank you, Bonnie, for inviting me both to this interview and to the book club, and for your very guiding questions, helping me to try to present some of my thoughts on this subject. I will, of course, be very happy to present my thoughts, to respond to questions, to listen to others' ideas during the month of February when we do this book club. So thank you very much as well.
Lovely. I just want to remind everyone that you can find out more about Erel Shalit, Jungian Analyst in Israel. You can find more about him at his website, which is eshalit.com, and that's ESHLIT.com. Again, you can find out more about the book club and about Depth Psychology Alliance on www.depthinsights.com. That's DEPTHINSIGHTS.com. Depth Insights is really the website where we put all of the media and content that we feed through and to Depth Psychology Alliance. So it's kind of the media arm of the community. So you can find out more information there. We didn't really get into all your credentials, Dr. Shalit. You have a very, very long list, and I think rather than reading them here, what I'll do is let people go to the website, either yours or depthinsights.com on the book club. If they click on February, they'll be able to see all of your credentials there. It is definitely an impressive list. And again, I just really look forward to reading the book alongside you and really having a rich and rewarding time in February. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bonnie.